Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to docSHARE, our 2023 webinar series. From February to March, we have a curated lineup of talks with local industry experts speaking on a variety of topics pertaining to documentary craft and what goes into the pre- and post-production of executing your film. docSHARE is an initiative of the Documentary Filmmakers Association of South Africa to create opportunities for experienced film professionals to share their knowledge and engage with the work and concerns of the DFA's existing and prospective members. The program also offers a support network for 10 Tier 3 filmmakers who want to apply for their first NFVF development funding, where they access the docSHARE public sessions in addition to bespoke mentorship. And this session is open to the public, and we appreciate your attendance. Please note the docSHARE program is powered by the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, PESP3, administered by the NFVF. Thank you to the NFVF for this opportunity. And today we welcome Lauren Groenewald, who will be speaking about proposal writing. The talk will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A starting at 15:45. So please start thinking of your questions. However, we are happy to take a few questions along the way. And just a little bit about the topic. So this session investigates all the elements that are required in a proposal, as well as the NFVF funding application portal, from synopsis to treatment, character, distribution and marketing, production progress, and filmmaker profile. Lauren will also share tips on how to use the writing process to identify your project's strengths and weaknesses so that you can enhance the next steps of your project. Lauren, thank you for being with us. Please, could you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your professional background, and then please dive into the topic.
Okay, thanks very much. I actually started my career in radio. I started working for Channel Africa very, very long time ago. So in my opinion, content is always king. Obviously, as filmmakers, we start telling our stories visually, but at the end of the day, we have to have a story. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is really finding the story. I moved from Channel Africa to working on arts programming. I worked in news for some time, and then I just found that documentary was a very happy home for me, in that I really think that the drama of real life is a lot more enticing than having to write things. We can't make up what we're exposed to every day. But we still, whenever we're telling a story, whether it's a documentary or anything else, we really need to have a clear idea of what the story is that we want to tell. And we all need funding to be able to tell those stories, whether people are buying our work or whether we get soft funding. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is the importance of the proposal, because that is really the first step of securing your funding. And that is during your development phase, before you've gone out and shot your rushes and before you're able to cut a trailer. You have to be sure that you know what your story is. And after you know what your story is and you've had access to your characters, you then need to be able to write it up in a way that other people are invested in it and believe in it. So I thought what I would do today is basically just look at 3 case studies almost. I've been working as a producer for many years for Plexus Films. We've worked with a lot of young directors. We've worked on series. We've worked on 1 or 2 documentaries. And we've worked with some very talented filmmakers. And so I'm going to be referencing 3 projects that we managed to get funding for through the National Film and Video Foundation. Through previous years. Most of the funding that we've got from the National Film and Video Foundation, we've managed to get development funding and then production funding and then post-production funding. Can I just ask everybody to put their speakers on mute, because I'm getting some feedback which is a bit distracting. Okay, so the three films that I'll be referencing are Incarcerated Knowledge, done by a filmmaker called Dylan Bailey, and I'm sure you all know about Dylan and his work. And Dylan started working with us on a series called Head Wrap many years ago, and he's always had an incredible talent for narrative, and also he has an incredible ability to liaise with people and to get people to give him access into their lives. And the story Incarcerated Knowledge is really about that, being able to move into a world that's very difficult to access. And this is something that you also have to show when you're writing your proposals, is your level of access. The other film is a film that we were involved with in the development phase called I Afrikaner, done by Annelette Steenkamp. And that film, we went through so many mutations of rewriting the proposal depending on who we were getting funding from. And you'll find that with your work, that often, depending on who you're pitching to, you have to rewrite your ideas to fit that particular funder. Sometimes it's just about a word count, and sometimes it's just about the angle. But the most important thing is that your synopsis is always very clear. And then the last film is a film that I worked on quite recently, which was called Dance Me to the End of Time, a film by Melanie Chait. And we also managed to get some production funding from the NFVF for that. So I think let's start off with asking ourselves, what is a documentary proposal? And I think what we need to understand is it's not just about telling the story, it's all aspects of your proposed film. So it includes your project history, your audience. You need to convey the style and approach of your storytelling. You need to let people know who you're collaborating with. So you basically need to get buy-in. You need to have people invested in your story as much as you are. And that doesn't just come with the story, it also comes with them believing that you can tell that story and that you're the right person to tell that story and that you've put the right team together. I'm not going to go into budget or anything like that because I know some of the other sessions have dealt with that. So we'll look specifically at the proposal writing. So I looked at the list of requirements from the NFVF. And unlike some funding organizations like Sundance, which I think Eric was talking to us now, they aren't as structured in terms of word counts. They have got word counts and all the rest, but they will ask you for a 1 or 2 page letter of motivation, a synopsis, a detailed development schedule, a detailed development budget, then a document listing your proposed target audience, your own CV. That's really important when you're writing your CV for a film application.
Lauren, you're on mute.
How long have I been on mute?
Just a second.
Yes.
Okay, so it's really important that when you're writing your CV and everything else, that we can always feel your voice and who you are as the filmmaker. Because people are going to believe in your story, they're going to believe in your team, but most of all, they need to believe in you as the director and the producer. And I'm assuming that a lot of people that are joining us today are directors. I know in terms of our mentees, we're working with directors. So the purpose of your documentary really is to pitch to investors, to secure funding. And even if you don't pay yourself, like many of us don't at the beginning when we're developing a project, you still need your budget for your equipment, for licensing, for salaries, for crew. So your proposal is your first and most important tool for raising funds. I think often what we do as producers is once we've written up our proposal, we always try and get development funding so that we can shoot something. And Kastarine, one of our mentees, has just mentioned that they've gone off and shot some rushes, which they then will be using to also inform the writing of their proposal. So your proposal needs to contain, firstly, a log line, a working title. You need a synopsis, and your synopsis will outline your key characters for your film. You need a treatment, which is more of a description of your film. And then you will also include things like your project history, your intended audience, the style and approach of your storytelling, if you've shot any material. You will also, as I said earlier on, a big section of your proposal is to actually elicit confidence in your project. So I think it's really important that people can see from your proposal that you know what you're doing and you know what story you're wanting to tell. So the thing that I always struggle with when we're writing is a lot of funders will ask you for a log line. And a log line is basically just a 1-sentence summary of your or description of your film, which is not a very easy thing to do. But in that one sentence and the amount of time it takes you to write that sentence, the film should crystallize for you. So when people see that line, they really should know what your film is going to be about. So I thought maybe what I'd do is to show you a trailer of Dance Me to the End of Time. And then after that, I'll just share the log line and you can see whether you think the log line encompasses what the film is actually about. I'm going to try and share my screen. So just give me a minute to sort this out. Okay.
Why does one film one's life partner dying?
Well, Mel says she calls me Lazarus. I just had this turnaround, and I'm so grateful. From your perspective now, what do you feel is meaningful about living? Every moment.
We went to visit Nancy's parents, who still lived on their tobacco plantation, where DDT had been sprayed since 1945.
We have to remember that children born today are exposed to these chemicals from birth, perhaps even before birth. Now, what is going to happen to them in adult life? We simply don't know.
Okay, so that's the promo for Melanie's film. And her one sentence or summary description of her film is Dance Me to the End of Time is a film about love in the face of death. And that's a very short and small sentence, but I think the sentence speaks volumes in terms of trying to communicate what the film is about. And I think for Melanie, in terms of making the story, writing the proposal, she first had to find the essence of what the actual film is about. And, you know, she looked at a lot of things. She wanted to look at the impact of pesticides. She wanted to look at relationships. But at the end, I think she concluded that the film was really about love in the face of death. And that informed the writing of the script, and that informed the edit. And so it's really worth taking the time to sit down and to really try and sort of say, what is my film really about? What is that one thing that I'm trying to say with my film? What is the key premise, the key question, or the major thing that I'm trying to communicate with my film? The other film that we'll see an example of just now is Incarcerated Knowledge, and Dylan wrote Incarcerated Knowledge is the story of one man. Maybe I'll share this with you, then you guys can just see the document as well. So basically, he written Incarcerated Knowledge is the story of one man losing his life and another trying to rebuild his. And his story is about a young man who's just leaving Pollsmoor prison after being found guilty of manslaughter, a very contested manslaughter. He killed his mother's boyfriend, and he's coming out and he wants to try and rebuild his life and get a second chance. So that line as well really encapsulates for Dylan, because there were a lot of ethical issues around the film, because you're telling a story of somebody who has taken somebody's life, and in a way you're rooting for them to start on their new journey. So, you know, Dylan spent a lot of time trying to find the essence and the heart as well of what his film would be about. And I think your log line will probably only come after you've really worked through your synopsis. But in most of your applications, whether you're writing to Sundance or ITFA or any other funding institution, everyone's going to ask you for that line. And then the third film that we'll be looking at just now is called Afrikaner, which is a film by Annette Steenkamp. And her log line was Afrikaner is an intimate portrait of South Africa after apartheid, told through the lens of a white Afrikaner filmmaker, as her family tries to come to terms with their relationship to the land. So I think if you look at all three of these log lines, in my opinion anyway, these are all films that I would want to see. I think that they communicate quite clearly what the filmmakers are trying to achieve. So I think your log line is really born out of what your synopsis is, and you'll find, like Eric will find, that a lot of the funders will give you a number of words, how long they want the synopsis. But the synopsis should really never be more than half a page. And I think that people often get lost in flowery words and trying to be very clever with ideas, when in fact, after reading the synopsis, the funder or the reader or the commissioning editor should have a really very clear idea what your film is about. They need to know what they're going to see on screen, and they need to know what they're going to be funding. So as a guideline, I think that one should always, and I'll jump back and forwards, I've made some notes, but it needs to contain these elements. You really need to know who is the film about. So your main character or your cast of characters. In Melanie's case, the story is told by her, and the main character is her partner of 20 years, Nancy. In Dylan's film, the main character is Peter Christians, this young man who comes out of jail. In iAfrikaner, Annalette has a cast of characters, a cast of female characters. And in her synopsis, she really needs to communicate already. People need to know, okay, who are the characters? And your characters really need to be on some kind of journey. And there needs to be some challenges, because otherwise you really don't have a story. And I think for us as well, when we're making films for the first time, you really need to elevate your film idea from being an insert. You know, it's fine to make an insert, but that's something very specific. If you want to take it to the next level of storytelling, your character really needs to be confronted by some kind of challenge. Something needs to be at stake, and the stakes need to be very clear in your synopsis. What is at stake? What do they hope the outcome will be if they can overcome this challenge? And then what is the resolution or the culmination of this journey? And because we're working with documentary, the final act is always the most difficult, because we don't always know what the outcome will be. But we at least need to have an idea of what will be lost or what will be resolved if there is a specific outcome. And you also need to, when you're shooting, you need to be shooting with the intent, which will come from writing your synopsis, of knowing where you want your story to go. So I'm going to talk about a little bit, I'd like you just to see incarcerated knowledge, because it's always good to have a case study in mind when you're thinking about writing. So this is Dylan's trailer. And as I said, these films were directed by Dylan, Melanie, and Annalette, and we as Plexus, we were on board as producers, but we are creative producers, so we spent a lot of time developing the actual proposal documents.
Lauren, is the sound on mute?
Can you not hear?
I think so. Oh, we can hear you now. We couldn't.
I wasn't supposed to come out now, but I told it would look. My mommy's outside. I have to go feed, so I want to surprise her. You just give me a sign when to stop. Je kom al met maat, zie.
Ik heb er zeker nog een olie bij kwam.
Je kom al met maat.
Weet je niet waar aan je kopie? Je sluit die nood voor die trok.
Mijn naam is Peter John Christians. Ik is 26 jaar oud. Ik is geboren in Walapak, groot geraakt daar. Het zal altijd die consequenties dragen van je actions. Spree at last. But the struggle will continue. You can't even go to the hospital when you're ill. You, getting the family, you must ask to listen. Oh, I know that. Leek op my point in te speel die song van die bekende American hip-hop artist en ek sê vir myself, wat 'n strong drep by jou. En soms 'n stem wat my sê doen sy bitter. En ek like, no, doen sy bitter. En ek het teruggegaan na 'n enkel sel en ek het begin
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of context just in terms of the material that we were working with.
My name is Jim Ricketts. I'm a former advisor to the CIA,
Okay.
Department of
Goodness, let me
Defense,
just
and
stop
the White
there.
House.
Sorry about that. So I think the important thing about your synopsis is it really needs to drop us as the reader into the world of your character. We really need to understand who the character is. We need to understand what's at stake for the character. And if you can communicate this to your funder with your logline and your synopsis, and you'll already have their buy-in. The most important thing is to highlight what's at stake and what can be lost or what can be gained. And even for yourself, when you're in the development phase of your film and you're writing your synopsis should also guide you on knowing whether you are actually ready to go into production, or if you need to rethink the way you're telling your story. If it doesn't feel urgent enough or doesn't feel compelling enough, then you need to ask yourself why. So what I'd like to do is just break down, for instance, incarcerated knowledge and what would have to go into your synopsis. You'd have to identify your main character. So your main character is Peter Christians, a 20-year-old man who murdered his mom's boyfriend, and he's being released on parole. I'm going to share my notes with you. Okay. What's his journey? He wants to be reintegrated into society. He wants a second chance. He wants to become a famous rapper. How will you show this? And then you can outline, and this is also when your funder will see how far you are with the development of your project and whether you can actually pull it off. So Dylan would have, for instance, in his proposal have written that we will meet Peter John on the day that he leaves for his parole. And the timeline for his film will be 6 months. And really the premise is, will this man go back to jail or will he become a success? So the stakes are pretty high. We also know that he murdered his mom's boyfriend, and will he be reintegrated and accepted into his family? And then in your synopsis, you will write and you will explain to the reader how you will show his journey. So you will explain that you'll follow him as he goes for job interviews, auditioning sessions. You'll highlight all your major filming opportunities that you think, like going to his brother's wedding, meeting an agent, that kind of thing. And then within the context of, you also need to describe to your reader what the challenges will be. Clear cut, you know, it's a convicted felon trying to get back into society. He's inevitably going to break very strict parole conditions, so there is a chance of failure. He's entering a world of poverty with social challenges that probably contributed to his crime and his conviction in the first place. And at the same time, you have to convince the reader that you are actually going to root for, care about this convicted felon, because a lot of people don't give offenders a second chance. So your synopsis is really important in trying to pull your reader in to believe that this character is worth investing in. And then the other thing that needs to be in your synopsis is what will the outcome be? Will he make it? Won't he make it? There are two layers of making it. Will he make it as a rap artist, or will he just make it back into society? And with this outline, your funder will be able to see that you've got a vision for how your film will begin, what the middle of your film will be, and the culmination of your film. So I think before we go on to treatment and your narrative treatment, which is different from your synopsis and is a little bit more visual, whereas your synopsis is really just communicating the core of your story, maybe there's an opportunity here for people just to let me know if it's not clear what your logline and your synopsis needs to do.
Lauren, we have two questions. I'm going to go ahead and read them. So we've got a question from Sipa Mandla, who has asked, what is the difference between a logline and a tagline?
I think that there isn't much of a difference between a logline and a tagline.
Can anyone hear Lauren?
Can you hear me?
It's just my side.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear Lauren.
Yes, we can hear her.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll
we
just
can
plug
hear you.
my laptop in just in case that might be part of the problem.
Lauren, we can hear you now.
Okay, so Sipamanda, there isn't much of a difference between a tagline and a logline. It's really that one line. I mean, I think it depends on at what stage of your project you are. Because often your logline or your tagline will make it onto the poster of your film. And it develops, I think, as you're working on your project. But you'll find with every funding application, people want to know that you know what the essence of your film is. So what is the key question? What is the key premise? What is the heart of your film? And that's a very difficult thing for a filmmaker because there's so many things you want to explore, but you need to be able to distill it so that you know what that is. And it's also just once again about getting the confidence. People need to invest in your project. So they need to know that you are invested and you know what the story is that you're trying to tell. And I think, you know, the main thing is how do you take a story out of just being an insert, you know, to be a really more layered and complex story with all those elements that we need. And you said there was another question, Taryn. I don't know if that answers it.
Thank you so much for the question. We have a question from Kani. How does one move away from over-promising or exaggerating the film's potential success and make it realistic throughout the proposal?
Well, I suppose that goes back to research. I think it's when we're telling a story, and I think for us as filmmakers, often that is a very difficult thing, is finding the stories. And often when one's a first-time storyteller, that's often your best film because it's a story that you really feel close to and that you really want to tell. But you do need to look at all those elements, because if you find that your characters don't have any challenges or your characters aren't charismatic enough, sometimes you have to walk away from a project. So I think with your synopsis, you just need to be really honest in answering those 4 questions and basically saying, you know, who are my characters? What is their journey? What are their struggles? How will they overcome them? And what is the conclusion? You need to be able to answer those questions. And if you can't answer those questions, then you need to relook at how you're telling your story. Often I think the challenge also comes in when we're telling a story about someone who's done something before. And so it's a retrospective story as opposed to a story that's happening in the now. And because it's documentary, you want to follow people in the now, but there's nothing happening in the now. And that's when your proposal and your script is very important, so that you can rework and rethink the way you're going to tell that story, because then you're going to tell it in the past and you're going to have to treat it as a historical documentary. So that will come to the next phase, which is your treatment and your style.
Thank you for the question. We have one more. Do challenges, desired outcome apply when working on a bio about someone who has passed?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if, is this from Nondumiso? If Nondumiso, if you watched the Nina Simone film on Netflix, which is a portrait of someone, somebody who has passed and somebody who had major challenges, So that story, because there's this incredible archive, is told, and all those points that we're talking about are addressed in that film. It's somebody who has immense talent, but who has to overcome huge challenges, both personal, politically, socially. So I think for our synopsis, we're not outlining or we're not fleshing out at this point the social context and all the history. And I think context is really very important in any kind of proposal or storytelling. But for your synopsis, just be really clear about, this is what my film is about. This is who the characters are. This is what you're going to see on screen. I'm going to go back to my notes and maybe just show you what Dylan's synopsis was for that story. And now that you've seen a bit. So Peter is in for murder of his stepfather. He survived South Africa's most notorious prison, Pollsmoor, and he's forsworn his membership of the powerful 28. With that behind him, hindering him, Peter must work hard to reintegrate himself to the community. He has a passion for music, and he will use this to turn himself from victim of the ghetto to a hip-hop artist. Director Dylan Valley will follow Peter from the first day of his release and delivers unprecedented, uncensored access to the life of a man born, it seems, without a chance. Undaunted, Peter faces the challenges his ex-con status presents, immerses himself in music, and creates a cathartic, triumphant refrain to describe the apparent chaos that comes with the breaking of cycles. Will he survive and redeem himself in the eyes of his family and the community? So this synopsis does not present a conclusion, but it presents a very strong question. And this is what your synopsis needs to do, is like, what is the premise for this film? And in this particular film is, will he make it or won't he make it? And there's a very good chance that he might not make it. Once we start working on the treatment, we then go into the social context of the film, and we start looking at, where does he come from? What are the stats for young people living on the Cape Flats? What was he exposed to as a youth? How does his story fit into the bigger picture of young South Africans? I'll just scroll up and find that. So this is where you start elaborating in your treatment on the context of, where does he live? He lives in a non-white neighborhood in South Africa. Often you're writing these proposals as well, and you need to think about your audience. If you're writing for the NFVF and you start talking about Rocklands or Mitchell's Plain or Grassy Park, they will know where that is. But if you're writing for Sundance or for ITFA, for an international panel, then you need to give a little bit more context, because people don't necessarily have the same context. So I don't know if it's helpful to read through all of this. Maybe I can just share this with people who want to read through the content. But once you start getting into your treatment, then you start exploring the context and the landscape and making it relevant for a bigger audience. Because that's really the challenge as a filmmaker, is to take a small story, and it's usually the small stories that have the biggest impact, and then make it relevant for a bigger audience.
Sorry, could everyone just go on mute? We're having some feedback.
Okay, so before we get into the treatment, the other thing that the funders will ask you for, and that the NFVF will ask you for, and this feeds into your other documents, like for instance, your distribution plan, and it feeds into your status of the project, it feeds into questions they ask you around your timeline, is you need to, for yourself, know, am I in development with this film? And this will often happen, I think it was Nondamiso's question or somebody's question, how do I know I'm not over promising or over committing? You might read your synopsis and feel like, I'm not there yet. I need more research and I need support in terms of development. Or you might find that you think, okay, I'm ready to go out and shoot now.
I'm good. I'm in a Zoom.
Oh, no.
That's going on.
What can we help you with today?
Jesus.
Put your thing on mute.
I don't know what the name of it. Don't worry. There's like a whole lot of people over there. Hang on, let me just check. I'm muted.
You're not muted.
Sorry.
Guys,
Sorry.
the host can mute normally people that
Yes,
yourself.
yes.
Just mute Kanye. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. So sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but we were talking about the status of the project and the timeline. So I think the exercise of writing your logline and your synopsis will give you a very good idea of where you are with the project. And then depending on that, you will write your treatment to say I'm in development. These are my ideas. You know, I do need to do a bit more research. And I know that Nao and them, I spoke to her about her project about 6 months ago, and they're probably in a very different place now, where you then go out and you meet your people, you do maybe research shoots and you build that into your actual treatment. You need to be clear on how much longer you need with your project, how much time you need. Like for instance, if we're working with a story like Peter's story, we can, when we're doing our timeline for the NFVF, say we need to shoot for 6 months, because that's the period of his parole. So we know within that 6 months, something would have happened. Or we can say, we still need to film at Polsmoor, we need to get permission to film at the facility. So based on that, you'll work out what your time frame is for your shooting. I know that a lot of people struggle with the distribution plan and the time frame, which is one of the requirements from the NFVF, and it is very difficult when you're at the beginning of a project to say, okay, I think my project has got legs to do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes I think you can overpromise there a bit in terms of what you're hoping to achieve with the project, because you know we're not working. It's not an exact science, but you can really, depending on the story, you can determine how much time you will need, and that's the kind of information you'll give to the funder. So I'd like to just go into then the treatment, and the treatment is quite different from the synopsis. This is where you can elaborate a bit. You need to communicate with your audience why you are the right person to tell the story. And when Tabang and I were working on his project that he's pitching now, we spent a lot of time talking about why he wanted to make the film. And once you start interrogating that, you'll sometimes find that you'll tell the story quite differently, because people need to believe in you, and you need to know why you want to make the film and why you're the right person to make the film. And you'll include that motivation in your director's treatment, but also when you're writing your CV, it's really important that people get to know who you are and why you are the right person, and essentially why this film matters. Why do we want to fund this film? Why is this film important? So in the case of Incarcerated Knowledge, we are making a comment really on youth in South Africa, the context in which they grow up politically, socially. We can see how important it is maybe to give people a second chance. When you look at Peter as maybe somebody who's your son or your brother, we can talk about the generational context. So it's really important to make that leap as to why the story is important just beyond this family and this character. What is its universal appeal? Why would it connect to an audience at large? And this is where context becomes important. And for me, context is really everything. Like if you're telling a story about a gay preacher in Amsterdam who happens to be a lesbian, that story is very different from telling that story in rural Transkei, where somebody's coming from the Bodi, from a small village there, and they're gay and they want to be a preacher. The contexts are so different that the struggles and the journey will be very different. And when you're writing your treatment, that's a place where you'll explore that kind of detail. So I see that we are kind of running out of time. I thought it would be much longer than it's been. I think what I'd like to do is maybe just show you another trailer. This is a trailer from iAfrikaner, and we can go straight into, we won't go into the synopses here, but we'll go straight into the way the director wrote the treatment for her characters. So I'm going to share the screen with you again.
my oë oopgemaak het as ek maar op die plaas.
Dis hartseer om van die plaas af te gaan met jy so lief het. Hy is deel van jou, maar jy kan nie net van herinnering lewe nie. As jou lewe bedreig word, dan moet jy vorentoe beweeg.
Want hulle praat kak, hulle het nie self sê. Ek sê bang hulle fokker op my dop, verstaan jy wat ek sê?
Nou die wapens op oupa se kop, en hy trek die snellig. Hy sê dit my God, wees genadig. En toe vat ek my handkarbuit wat gelaai is, ek sê, oh, you want money. En ek sit hom op vuur. En toe ek vir hom vuur sit, sê die kort, ek sped het. Toe sê hy, oh, it's a machine gun.
Ek is in vrees. Ek weet nie hoe om dit, ek kan nie self daaroor te vloek aan myself opsluit. Ons het vanaf plat. Tussen hulle is van hulle net vir hulle meisies beskerm. Teen al die haat wat er buite is. Hierdie foto. As hy beskryf. As hy
Dit vir die gemeenskap. Just our lives, but our properties.
Party mense dink net ander mense se bloed is nie dieselfde as hulle se. Alhoewel ons bloed dieselfde almal rooi is.
Did you know that snoring?
Okay, so the reason I wanted to show you that clip is that you can see it's a very, very, very personal film. And it's a film that's evolved over 8 years. So finding the essence and the heart of that film in terms of trying to get funding for it was no easy task. And it took a very, very long time. So I want to just show you the more creative way of writing your treatment. And let me share the screen again. So what Annalette did here is she really outlined the 4 generations of women that she was telling the story about. And it's very clear to the reader what her approach is. So she starts talking about, this is a story about 4 generations of women. They all, the grandmother's the matriarch. And then she sort of gives a theme for each character that she's dealing with. So Christine, who lost her dad to a home invasion, is living in fear. Chanel is living in hope. And she talks about the cycle of life, seasons of nature, birth and death as the major poetic basis for the film. So you can see when you look at that material that she's gone into the film in terms of how she's approached it visually and creatively, really working with the land as an element and a constant in the film, because thematically her film is centered around land and people's connection to the land and people's different relationships with the land. So when you're writing your treatment, that's when you can start exploring that and be a lot more creative and poetic with what you're saying. Once your funder has a sense of what they're going to see on screen, then you can become more imaginative in terms of how you write things up. So I see we've got 12 minutes left, so I'm going to stop there. And do you want to open it up for questions, Taryn?
Yes, thank you. So we have a question from Neo. Is it advisable to be the director of your own film if you are the protagonist?
I think there are very many films like that, and what makes it particularly strong is there's certain things that only you can say. For instance, if it's a film about family, or if it's a film about your community, it's very difficult sometimes for an outsider to come in and make those assertions or judgments or tell the story without the same amount of empathy that you might tell. So it's a very personal thing, but I think sometimes a film like Our Afrikaner couldn't have been made without the filmmaker being inside and outside of the film. So there's a very self-conscious presence of the filmmaker within that film. You know that throughout the film, she references herself, and you know that this person is telling someone else's story, but they also in the story. And that's also a visual device which is employed and which is also articulated in her proposal, where the funder will read the proposal and they will know that the filmmaker's hand and eye and face and will be felt throughout the film. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Neo. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying yes, it answered. Thank you.
We have a question from Sihle. Sihle is asking, what are proposal red flags for you as an experienced reader?
Well, I think for me, it's when something feels like it's a story I could tell in 5 minutes because it's not layered enough. And you must remember that there are very many stories that are similar. And what makes a story unique is really the point of view of the director, how the director will tell it. So I would like to see that the director has got a strong point of view, and that the director has really thought about the story beyond a master interview and visuals, that the director has got an understanding of narrative, which means that the director knows what the central question is. The director understands that they need to spend the necessary time with their subject. And that's where access comes in. Like in Dylan's story, for instance, Dylan worked on that film for 3 years with incredible access to Peter John. So I need to feel in my first reading that the director has spent the time with the character and done the necessary research.
Thank you, Sihle. Thanks, Lauren. From Liza or Lisa, we have, how do you show that your film will be different to others made that is different to what has been made on a similar story?
Well, I think as an exercise for yourself, you really need to think about what am I going to see on screen? What do I have access to film? And I think, you know, there are so many stories. I mean, Tabang and Tabang is the mentee I'm working with, we were talking about struggling artists. So yes, everybody who's an artist is generally a struggling artist. So how is my story different? And once Tabang started interrogating why he wanted to tell the story, he realized there was this very strong link between his relationship with his mom and the art form and the artist's relationship with his single mom. And suddenly we started exploring themes that were maybe not in the initial writing of the script. So once again, it's just about spending the time. And then sometimes you have to walk away from a story if you think that you can't, if it hasn't got a unique point of view. And but you'll know from your character. I mean, I always say it's about character and content.
Lauren, we have a lovely comment from Elalwani. She says that the film clip you shared by Dylan Valley is one of the films that instilled her love for documentary filmmaking many years ago, and she thinks she watched it at Encounters. Thank you for sharing that. We also have a question from Savannah. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Lauren Clifford Holmes would like to ask a question. Lauren, if you want to just jump in and ask your question first, please.
Sure. Hey, Lauren. Thanks so much. It's always great to just, you know, get some views from someone who's got so much experience as you do. And, I think probably a lot of us on this call may have tried to do funding with the likes of the NFVF before, and where I really end up struggling is that things get thrown out on technicalities. You can spend time on such brilliant documents around story and proving your access and showing that you've thought through your production schedule, showing that you've thought through your budget, all things that I'm very familiar with. But for example, on this most recent application, they've thrown out one that I was doing with a co-producer because the ID was, and all the business documents were hers, that I uploaded to keep consistent, and there was no option for 2 IDs to be uploaded. So they've come back and they've thrown the whole thing out, and there's no way to know because they don't give you other feedback, like, were you really in the running? Is this just throwing you out on a technicality? What has been your experience, and is there any way to push back and get oneself back in the game? Or is it like you've just got to take that experience and move on? Okay, it was my co-producer's ID and not mine, and therefore my whole application is disregarded. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's not necessarily the main focus of this call, but I think it is an experience that a lot of us have, is that technicalities get in the way of actually getting the funding for great stories. Thanks.
No, absolutely. It's maybe something that we can take up as the DFA. And I think we have previously taken up issues like that. We've also had a similar thing with our pitch where, people are dealing with load shedding and all sorts of things, and somebody handed in also the wrong tax certificate. But I suppose that's just also due diligence on our side. Just to try and make sure that we very specifically look at what the funder is asking for, because you can just be thrown out on the technicality, even if you've got a great idea. But I think definitely let's take that up with the DFA.
Okay, cool. I can do that. Thanks, Lauren.
And then I see Savan asked, in the treatment, how extensive should the conceptual relevance and emotional relevance? So I think if you look at different, it's also maybe just a good exercise for everybody to look at the different funding applications from different funders. So if you go onto the ITFA site and you look at what they require, you'll see different funders ask for different levels of interpretation in treatment. So some people will really want you to be quite clear about your visual aesthetic. They'll want to know who your crew is. They might even ask you for filmic references. Generally, I think, though, if we applying to somebody like the NFVF or somebody who's got to go through a huge amount of funding applications, short and to the point, I think the main thing is get your synopsis right, and then your other work can be quite extensive. But on the first read, people need to know what they're going to see on screen. They need to be able to see the film.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Lauren, for answering the question. It was quite informative.
Thank you. And we have another question. I think this may be the final question from Clifford. How do you transcend or merge genres in documentary? Particularly, how do you demonstrate it in a treatment?
Well, I mean, I think that's where point of view comes in and the vision of the filmmaker. And I think, if you are a more experienced filmmaker and people know your work, and you're a Werner Herzog or somebody, people will give you license and trust you in terms of how you're going to be expressing yourself. But when you're a new filmmaker and people don't know your work, you maybe need to be more succinct in your actual write-up. Often you can show that you've thought about it through citing other references or other films, so that people know that you've got a clear understanding of what it is that you want to achieve. I didn't watch the whole of JC's talk the other day, but I did manage to get some of it. And I thought, just from what I saw, the visual interpretation of her edit was very, very beautiful, and it was bringing together quite a few different genres. And I think if we look at what's happening on the big screen as well, I mean, you see documentary reflected in a lot of non-fiction, fiction as well. So I think, if you're a new filmmaker, maybe reference some things that you've seen so that people know what you're trying to achieve with your treatment.
And if we can just take one more question from Neo, what is the difference between outline and treatment?
Well, I think that your outline would fall into your synopsis. So it's your story synopsis, and your treatment, your creative treatment, is more about fleshing out, why is this film important? How am I going to tell my story? How am I going to approach my visuals? So your outline is ready for people to understand what the film will look like. What is my story? I mean, it sounds very simple, but that's the most difficult thing in half a page, for people to actually understand what they're going to be seeing on screen. And that's really your job when you're writing a proposal, is for people to be able to see the film in their mind's eye.
Okay, I think that concludes our question and answer session. I'm just going to come back on. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been incredibly informative, and we will have this recorded. Please look out for the video link on the DFA's Instagram link tree in a few days. And we hope you will join us for the 4th webinar in our series next week on Thursday, the 9th of March, with Tiny Mungwe on finding a roadmap in documentary structure. So I look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you so much again, Lauren.
Thank you for everyone for taking the time. I hope it was useful in some way. There's a lot we can talk about. So if anyone's also welcome, I'm happy for Taryn to share my details. If you've got specific questions and I can input, I'd be happy to do that.